In this next sequence of lessons, we're going to install and configure a single server SharePoint SQL 2012 BI environment. This is what we'll commonly do to have a VM that we're using just for proof of concept and to test out ideas and see how the overall stack works. So some of the things that we will do in this environment will not necessarily be best practice for production, but are done for expediency and getting a proof of concept up and running. At the end of this sequence, we'll have all of these components installed, configured, and ready to use. The VM itself is going to combine SharePoint and SQL Server services. So the SharePoint web front end and the SQL backend for SharePoint and the analysis services components, they're all going to run on this one VM. So clearly not something we would want to do if we were going to support a lot of users, but good for testing. The service account setup is very simplified. We're just going to create one domain service account for everything. This again is not what you would do in a production system, so just pointing this out in advance. And again, not suitable for production environments, so please don't configure this kind of environment and deploy it in production. The requirements for this environment, so the POC VM itself, which I'd recommend at least 2 and 4 CPUs if you can do it, and for memory 8 gig would be minimum, 12 gig would be probably a working optimal. We'll also have a second VM in the environment that's the Active Directory controller. If you're deploying the VM in an existing Active Directory environment, you wouldn't really need this VM at all. You would just use your existing Active Directory. If you are setting up a completely sandboxed environment, many people would like to combine the Active Directory service right onto the POC VM. I'd recommend against doing that. It's not something that the overall software configuration is designed to do, so you're hacking a little bit if you do this. And if you think about it, the POC VM is going to need to be bigger in order to support Active Directory, so you're not gaining that much whether you combine these two or keep them separate. So if you can keep them separate, please do that. The basic load sequence we'll go through is we'll create an AD service account in Active Directory. When we create that account, it won't need any privileges. Anything it does need will be assigned during the install sequence. Then we'll install the SharePoint software onto the application server, but we won't run the farm configuration at this point. Then we'll install the Power Pivot for SharePoint software. This is done using the SQL 2012 installation DVD. And then after we've installed that, we'll use the Power Pivot configuration tool, which will create the farm for us, create the service applications we need, like Excel services and Secure Store service and so on, and it'll configure Power Pivot. So for a POC, this is a really great tool to use because it just does everything for you, and it's pretty quick. After that's done, we'll install reporting services and configure that in the farm, which will also give us Power View at the same time. And then this is an optional step, but if you do have multi-dimensional analysis services workloads that you want to add into your proof of concept, then you might want to install that as a secondary step, and then what's left off of this list, as well as installing other services like master data services and data quality services. Any of those can be added to the VM as well. Just keep in mind, if you have the minimal amount of RAM, you might be pushing it a little bit if you try to add too much. So you've got to balance how many resources you can allocate to this VM versus what you want to include in it. And then the last thing we'll do, and it is important to do it last, is to apply the CU1 to SQL 2012. By the time you're watching this, perhaps CU1 isn't that new anymore, but when you do add whatever cumulative update or service pack onto SQL, do it last so that all of your instances will get installed at the same time.